Like going live, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Jean Humbrecht with Humbrecht Law, criminal and traffic defense attorney in Manassas, Virginia. Welcome to my local business spotlight. Today, I have a good friend and one of my favorite guests. You probably recognize him. He has been on the show before, Darren Marquardt of the Marquardt team with Long and Foster. So Darren, we're going to be talking a lot about real estate today, and well, all about real estate because that's what Darren does. And Darren was on a year ago with Trevor Whaling, who does financing for homes. And we were talking about how COVID was changing things, home inspections, and all that stuff. That was a year ago. So I'm sure there has.
Sorry, I had a little feedback there.
Okay. That's what happens when you're live to tape. Nobody has time for editing, so whatever. We'll just breeze past that. And that was a year ago.
Yep.
So I'm sure we are all going to be interested in any of the changes that have happened since then and what people can expect in real estate today. We've all heard different things. Interest rates low. It's a seller's market. Sorry, somebody keeps Facebook messaging me and I can't turn that sound off. But Darren is the expert, so he's going to be talking to us. And I encourage you all to type any questions you have into the comments, and we will ask Darren when we have him here. Because this is a very important topic. And last thing I'm going to say is a couple things that I have heard about recently. Interest rates are low. It's still low. It's still a seller's market. I've also heard that a lot of buyers are stopping to look because they're getting frustrated with not being able to find anything. But I'm sure Darren's going to address all those things. So anybody who's watching, type your questions in. If you have similar questions, different questions, and then Darren will answer everything that he can today. So the topic of today's presentation, the arts and smarts of real estate. The three most important factors in real estate are generally price, condition, and location. After 20 years in real estate, Darren understands all the ins and outs of all the types of real estate transactions. Today, we're going to be discussing the differences of a seller's and buyer's market, like I mentioned, how to pursue a great deal, foreclosures and short sales, and many other fine details of the real estate transaction, and how you can get what you want in the time that you want it. A home can be tasteful, sophisticated, exceptional, reliable, secure. Demand the same of your real estate agent. Welcome to an unparalleled real estate experience. When it's time to buy a home, sell property, or purchase real estate as an investment, choose a superior real estate resource, Darren Marquardt and the Marquardt team. You'll never know if I wrote this or Darren did. Benefit from proven market expertise, exceptional service, and a team dedicated to ensuring successful transactions. Darren's team and Darren hold the keys to open doors and help to make for smooth moves, as Darren will do his little dance. They always exceed expectations, so let his team and him help you to get what you want in the time you want it and be your realtor for life. So,
Perfect.
I'm going to turn it over to you. At this point, if you could tell everybody a little bit about your background and anything else you want them to know preliminarily before we start getting into just questions and answers.
Sure. Look forward to that. So as in the description you heard, I've been real estate in Virginia for going on my 21st year, so 20 years total. I actually started in the early 1980s as a real estate assistant in with a company called Edina Realty in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, which is where I grew up. So I got a little bit of start back then, but 20 years ago, I got my real estate license here in Virginia and have made a go of it ever since here in Virginia. It's become my full-time career, although I do lots of other things. My first year in real estate, well, just so you know, the average real estate sells maybe 3 to 6 homes a year. It's surprisingly not very much. The average first year agent sells 1, maybe 2, 1 to 3. So it's not a whole lot. My first year, I sold almost 35.
Wow.
And so I had a really banging first year, which put me on the map and really got some attention. I was the rookie of the year my first year. And then subsequent years after that, I started building a team and adding people and agents on it, assistants, et cetera, et cetera. And was one of the top producing agents in or teams in the Long and Foster and certainly in Northern Virginia. And at one point, I was recognized as one of the top 1% agents, sales agents in the nation. Not currently at that production level any longer, mostly because I have made some decisions and commitments to myself personally to not work quite that hard. But I've got plenty of experience. In addition to selling real estate, I am also a corporate sales trainer, and so I train real estate agents for Long and Foster, which is the company I currently work with. On how to get their business up and running, how to fill out the contracts, how to use all the appropriate addendum and etc. And how to communicate with your clients and how to actually locate the clients. And so that's what I do. In addition to actually working with clients, I actually work with real estate agents to get them up and running. How's that?
That's great. So you definitely are bringing a lot of expertise to our conversation here. I don't know if there's a particular place you want to start, or if you want me to just start asking questions. And again, I know people are trickling in, so we're talking about real estate, and which I know a lot of people probably have questions. So pop your questions into the comments, and we'll get them answered while Darren is here. So Darren, you want to start with anything, or do you want me to just start with questions?
Well, sure, because in the introduction, you talked about it being a seller's market right now. So let's just talk a little bit about what determines a seller's market versus a buyer's market versus a more even a regular market. It's all based on the principles of business called supply and demand. When supply is low, but demand is high, that means prices tend to go up. And it also, in real estate, means that it favors the seller. So when there are very few houses available on the market, but lots of buyers on the market, then it's a seller's market. The way we describe it in real estate is through something called an absorption rate. Absorption rate. That's basically where what we look at all the data and we go, if no other property, no other new house came on the market, how long would it take for everything to sell, right? And in a seller's market, if it's less than 3 months, it's going to be a seller's market. And in Northern Virginia, most areas, not all areas, but most areas, we have less than a 1 month supply of homes available for sale. So that's a lot of buyer demand with very little opportunity for very little inventory. On the other spectrum of that, a buyer's market is when the absorption rate is really low. So if nothing went on the market, how long would it take? And if the houses stay on the market 4 to 6 or longer months on the market, then it falls into the buyer category. And what that basically is saying is that there's a lot of inventory, a lot of available homes, but the buyer demand is low. And that is often then what dictates price and terms for buyers and sellers. And a more even market or sort of a balanced market is usually when houses are on the market from say 2 to 4 months, or we say generally an average of 3 months. So if we had a 3 month supply, then we consider ourselves in a fairly balanced market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
A little complicated of an explanation, but absorption rate can be confusing. But basically, if nothing else comes on the market, how long will it take for everything to sell? It's like if we could liken it to our toilet paper shortage from this past year, it's like there was suddenly toilet paper became very desirable, and people were hoarding it and willing to pay an exorbitant prices. And most recently, with gas prices here in the Alexandria, Northern Virginia region, we had that breach and which shut down the pipeline, and so buyer demand became really manic and crazy. No gas available, lots of people who want gas prices went up. In fact, I heard of a story somewhere in Virginia where there was a gas station charging $8 or $9 a gallon during that. And so real estate is exactly the same way. When there's very little available, but a lot of buyers, prices get pushed up. It also means, Gene, that the buyers in a seller's market have to give up things. And that can be a tough thing. And one of those big things that you have to give up in a seller's market oftentimes is a home inspection contingency, and also finance contingencies and appraisal contingencies. And we can talk more about that in greater detail if you want, or move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about that. Let's talk about that and then get into if it's changing. Like if we could just briefly go through, how it was during COVID and where we're at now, because people who are not in real estate hear things. So I just want to ask you if those things are true.
Sure.
So can you talk to us about the financing contingency, the home inspection contingency, and the dangers? I would say dangers. I would never do it. The dangers of waiving those things,
Right.
if they are dangers.
Well, they are certainly. It depends on your perspective. If you're the buyer or seller, whether or not
I'm
they're.
looking at it as a buyer. So.
Yeah, exactly. Now, full disclosure, I am not an attorney, so unlike you, I cannot give legal advice. I only share with you my thoughts and feelings related to real estate and et cetera, et cetera. But we should really have just a quick discussion about what's called a contingency and how that relates to the contract. In a nutshell, when we write a sales contract and then you add a contingency to it, say home inspection contingency, finance contingency, appraisal contingency, it basically means that the contract is in full force. However, there are some items or some issue that has to be accomplished or resolved before it can take the next steps forward. So if this gets done, or if we agree to these terms after we've had an inspection, then the contract moves forward. So with a home inspection contingency, basically, when a buyer writes a contract, every buyer in Virginia, especially, and I'll tell you why, because Virginia is a buyer beware state. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. And when you buy a house in Virginia, when you go to settlement, the day of settlement, you take that property on with all its problems and anything that's may or may not be working. And essentially in Virginia, all property is sold as is. Now, that's pending certain things in your sales contract, but the seller doesn't have to disclose anything. The real estate agent has to disclose what's called adverse material fact. So having a home inspection is crucial for a buyer who's buying a house in Virginia, because Virginia is a buyer beware state. That being said, you can't necessarily make the contract contingent on the results of your home inspection. In a normal market, or in a buyer's market, what usually happens is you'll have your home inspection. And then let's say, it's a nice little house, but there's a few items that you would like to have addressed, like fix a window or replace a light switch, or it can be almost anything. But basically, the inspector says these items should be fixed. In a normal market, then, the buyer would then put together an addendum that says, we'll remove the contingency if the seller agrees to make these repairs. But in a seller's market, we don't usually have that option, because the contract is not contingent on the results of the home inspection. So back up a little bit. When I'm working with a buyer, I usually suggest that the buyer include in their offer a request for a home inspection for informational purposes, but not as a contingency in the contract. And I have successfully negotiated those in every contract I've written in the past 2 years, even though many sellers don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk more about that from the seller's point of view in a minute. Now, finance contingencies basically states that the buyer and seller agree to move forward with the sale of the house, but it's dependent on the buyer's qualifying or being awarded the mortgage, because they have to go through a whole process of underwriting, etc. And so until the mortgage is fully approved, the contract is open-ended. And if for some reason the buyer's financing falls apart or doesn't get approved, the buyer's not responsible, or can back out of the contract. And this is really scary because there are lots of things that can come up during that process. In fact, I had something recently where my buyers didn't qualify for the financing, not because they weren't qualified, but because the house didn't qualify. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, and so when you're buying a house in a seller's market in Virginia and you can't have a finance contingency, you have to have a really great lender who's already done all of the basic underwriting and collecting of all the paperwork and stuff, and really feels confident and comfortable that your loan is going to be approved without that. And then the other really big contingency that we lose in the seller's market is an appraisal contingency, an appraisal. Um, so we can further a discussion about these things either today or another time. But I want to make clear that the list price, the market value, what the buyers offer, what I think the house is worth, what the tax assessed value is, or what the county thinks that the value of the house is all immaterial, really, when it comes to the sales contract. What is important is what does the appraised value mean? And an appraiser will come in and do it, that's a licensee in Virginia. So all appraisers in Virginia are licensed. There's very strict and high regulations regarding appraisals, and the appraiser determines what the actual appraised value is. And then the mortgage company, well, whoever the buyer's mortgage company is, they will loan to the buyer up to but not to exceed the appraised value. So if you do not have an appraisal contingency and you're buying, let's say, a $500,000 house, but it only appraises for $475,000, but the sales price says $500,000 without an appraisal contingency, that's a $25,000 deficiency. The bank is not going to loan the buyer 500. They're only going to loan the buyer 475. Therefore, without the appraisal contingency, the buyer will be required per the contract to come to the table with the additional money or the additional difference. In this case, this example, $25,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if that appraisal contingency was part of the contract and the appraisal comes back for 475 and the bank says we're only loaning you 475, does that mean that the seller is going to drop the asking price to the appraisal price?
That's a great question. And in a normal market, when we do have an appraisal contingency, generally, as a rule, 9 times out of 10, I would say it's pretty common that if we have a low appraisal, that's what it's called, the low appraisal, the buyer will notify the seller, provide a formal notice that the house didn't appraise for the sales value. And then through addendums, asks the seller to reduce the sales price to the appraised value. Okay. And 9 times out of 10, or quite regularly in a normal market, a buyer's market certainly, and in a more balanced market, usually the seller will reduce the price to the appraised value, and then the contingency is removed and you move forward. And nobody has to bring any money to the table. Now, that's not the only option. And the addendum, the way it's written in Virginia, allows for a variety of options. So the seller may choose not to lower the price, and that is an option even in a regular market, and that's very commonplace right now, in which case then the buyer would have to bring the difference. The buyer and seller can split the difference in any percentageal increments. Usually it's 50-50. If, let's say, it's short 25,000, the buyer will bring 1250 to the table, 12,500, and the seller will reduce the price by 12,500. That's very common. Or some other increments like that. That's a common thing. Or The worst case scenario is the seller refuses to lower the price. We can't come to an agreement, and then the buyer and seller then void the contract based on the appraised contingency. But without a contingency, the buyer's on the hook to buy the property regardless.
And voiding the contract, to anyone who doesn't know, it just means erasing it. It never happened. Everybody gets their money back. Nobody's at a loss. That's essentially what that's a very quick layman's description of what voiding the contract is. We're both going to go our separate ways. I'm going to get back any money that I put into this. Whatever. Nobody's responsible for anything.
Well, if I might correct you on one little tiny thing. In Virginia,
that's just what voiding a contract is. Maybe not in real estate, but okay.
Well, because there are sometimes fees that the buyer or the seller will be responsible for, because there are lots of people and lots of other companies involved in the transaction. I'll give you a quick example. I just had a deal fall apart. My buyers were under contract to buy a house. Fortunately, they had a finance contingency. The deal fell apart because the buyer and seller couldn't come to an agreement over lender required repairs. Okay. And during the process of being under contract, the buyers ordered a termite inspection or a wood destroying insect inspection. That was a $50 charge. They had a well test, which was another $100, and a septic test to test the septic system, which was $700. And all of those fees were supposed to be paid at the settlement table. But when the contract voided, the buyer was responsible for all those charges.
Okay, and that was something that was previously agreed to. If the contract is voided, I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for that.
Yeah, and then sometimes, in a rare occasion, a commission might be earned or owed, or title fees, things like that. But that didn't mean to interrupt you, but that.
Okay, no, I mean that's important. Essentially, both parties can walk away from the contract, but you might lose a little bit of money depending on what you had previously.
Right, and in my buyer's case, they did lose a fair amount of money because the transaction went all the way up to the actual date of settlement and then passed. An interesting thing in Virginia, in the contract there's a whole big long paragraph, and I'm sure you can appreciate this being an attorney, that describes how the buyer and or seller go into what's called default. Right? How are you breaking the contract and unreasonably or unfairly or against the rules? You break the contract, and then who's held responsible for it? And there's always a deposit that is attached to a sales contract in Virginia for real estate, and it's usually a significant amount of money. And I forgot where I was going with this. Got a squirrel, but
money that the buyer could lose if they back out, or if a party.
Oh yeah, you can lose your deposit in the event that you break the contract and go into default. And so but when you have a contingency, usually that money is certainly returned. Anyhow.
I want to get to a couple of questions that our friends asked here, and then I want to come back to a question about this appraisal contingency. So remind me.
Yeah.
But I want to be respectful of their time, because I know they're both very busy ladies and they might have to go. So first, Sarah White, who is one of my all-time favorite guests on the show. I hope you are still there, Sarah. She is so super busy right now. Thank you for watching. Sarah said, I know the market is tough right now. Is it worth even looking at the moment?
Oh, that's a great question, Sarah. And I would say vote for Sarah for Falls Church delegate.
Yes, you live in Falls Church. Vote
for Sarah, because I love me some Sarah White. It depends is my typical response to a question like that, because it depends on whether or not you can afford to wait or not. Are there some challenges? Sure. Is it difficult to find a house? Yep. But good deals are still being made. And so if you're in a situation where now is really the best time for you, for whatever reasons your motivation to buy a house is, sure, there's no reason why you shouldn't wait. Interest rates are still very low, which is the reason why buyer demand is very high. And if you wait until, say, next year, interest rates might go up significantly. We could see interest rates. Right now, we're still seeing interest rates hovering around 3%, depending on the lender and the type of loan and their credit score. But it's, my first mortgage, my interest rate was 17%. Now, I don't think we're going to get to a 17% interest rate. However, next year at this time, we might easily see 5%, 6%. Those were very common percentages just a few years back. So then it might not behoove you to wait. It might be better for you to do it now because, and I know that I'm going to bring something up and then you're going to ask me questions about it, and I'm not going to be able to share with you a whole lot about it because I'm not an expert in this. But right now, because interest rates are really low, when people in about 5 or 6 years from now, interest rates are probably, let's say interest rates are at 6% in 5 years from now, right? Are you tracking with me, Gene?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, interest rates are at 3%, and in the near future, 5 years from now, interest rates are now at 6%. I'm going to guess that we're going to start to see in about 5 or 6 years, and we might start seeing them sooner, sales what are called assumable sales, in which case you assume the lower interest rate of the seller. And my mother loves to buy a house through assumption. So we're going to see that in the future. Yeah, you got.
I don't understand.
So
So you said that let's assume that in 5 years the interest rates are at 6%, and the buyer at that point is going to. That's where I'm lost. What do you mean the buyer assumes the interest rate of the seller?
So you're going to buy the house and you're going to assume the seller's loan.
Right.
Because they have a lower interest rate,
Uh-huh.
right?
Now.
So right now they're a little bit hard to find, but I am pretty confident that in the near future we're going to see buyers purchasing houses using assumable mortgage as their financing. Whereas by an outstanding mortgage, its terms are transferred from the seller to the buyer. And by assuming the previous owner's remaining debt, the buyer can avoid their own mortgage. And they're going to get a really low interest rate. So let's say interest rates, like I said, if you went out to apply for a loan and the loan interest rates were at 6%, but the seller has a loan where the interest rate's only 3%, it's going to make a lot of sense for the buyer to ask to assume the loan. And if the market is a buyer's market and sellers are having trouble selling their houses, assumable loans will be a real incentive to buyers to buy that house in a buyer's market.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
So
But we're not right there. We're not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. So, the trade-off now is there's not a lot of inventory, prices are higher, people have to waive all these contingencies, but the interest rate is really low. So when it's going to be more of a buyer's market, when there's more on the market, there's more on the market and it's more of a buyer's market, interest rate's going to be higher. But that buyer might be able to get that house in the future at the rate that it's at today.
That is correct. If they purchase the house using assumable financing. Now, Gene, one other thing I might add as to why now is a good time to buy rather than next year or in 2 years is because the prices are going up exponentially, right? So I have clients who have purchased homes in the last several months who've already made $10,000 to $30,000, $40,000 in equity just over a couple of months. And so you're actually making money by buying it now, more than you might if the market shifts. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but and again, this is me being a layperson in this industry. I've heard that things are eventually going to crash. House prices are well, I mean, that's relative. I don't want to get in a whole conversation, but it's going to turn more into a buyer's market eventually, and prices are going to go down. So if you buy now, when it's high, you're going to lose money if the value of that house goes down.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like what happened in 2008, 2009.
Right.
If you bought a house, one of the last houses I actually purchased was in 2008, and by 2009 it had dropped in value almost 50%. So an $800,000 house is now was in 2008 was worth about 400,000 in 2009, right? That happened to me. Um, but the conditions of the market were considerably different. Do I think there is um, a market adjustment in the near future? Absolutely. I do think that prices are going to stabilize, and then we might see a slight lowering, but there is currently no indication by any of the leading economists, leading real estate experts, of a market crash anywhere near what we experienced in 2008, 2009, 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the risk is lower than it was back then. Now, um, anything can happen in the world that can change, uh, how the real estate market is supported. And we learned that this year with the pandemic. To be honest with you, the pandemic actually exploded the real estate market. It was really good for real estate. The pandemic was great for real estate. Whereas other industries, like Sarah's industry, which was the restaurant business, was devastated. Real
Mm-hmm.
estate, on the other hand, residential real estate, commercial real estate, decimated.
Mm-hmm.
Residential real estate accelerated the market pace.
Can you explain why that is? Because people might be curious about that. Why is inventory so low? Why are there so many more buyers than houses on the market because of the pandemic?
Just so happens that I have a nifty answer for that. It was something what we refer to, or I refer to, as a pan exodus. So, with the pandemic, people were now at home,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to many people had to work from home, and they set up home offices and companies, major corporations, the government, everybody found ways to keep their businesses alive, or many of them, many businesses, finance businesses, your business, my business. We just started to work from home, and not let me give my proper English there, not um, commuting to our offices.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, there's no reason for me to live in Arlington or Alexandria, where taxes are high and property values are high. Why don't I move out west and find a quaint little house on a nice big pocket of land for a fraction of the cost of my $1 million property in Arlington or Alexandria?
Mm-hmm.
So we started seeing people move away from the inner city and away from the close in suburbs, and start to move outward, and an exodus away from work, because the commute's not an issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that was one of the things that really had a powerful impact. So people were like, we should sell our house and move out into the country. In fact, I am working with clients right now where that is exactly what they're doing. It's still happening. Now, part of the other reason why the real estate market boom took place is because people had more time on their hands, and they spent more time in their home, and they started to recognize that their home maybe didn't meet all of their needs, or their home needed a lot of maintenance, or they wanted to simplify, or they wanted to grow a little bit. And now they have time to sit in front of their computer and search any number of the real estate search engine sites. And so the online version of real estate really um, came to the forefront. And so people were like, oh, look at this great house. And they probably wouldn't have even seen it if they were in their office or on their, commute, because, around here, Gene, you can sometimes be in your car on your way to or from work for an hour or two, depending on
Mhm.
where you live in relationship to where your office is.
Mhm.
And so that's a lot of extra time that people had. Now I don't have a 4-hour travel time. I've done my work, start work at 8, get done at 4. I've got 4 extra hours that I normally wouldn't have had. And so that's also part of the reason.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Kind of. So I understand that people not not needing to live, right by DC or in Arlington, Alexandria, and then
Yep.
moving elsewhere, where as Janice said, you get more square footage for less money. So they become buyer. 2 questions. So they become buyers out in areas that are further away from DC. So first question, are housing prices in those areas going up more because more people are moving out? And then also, I'm a little confused as to how it becomes a seller's market if the people that are moving are selling their house, but they're also buying, because in my head, it would seem that the numbers are going to stay the same.
Well, interesting you should say that and ask that, because we have noticed significant slowdowns in the condo markets in Arlington and Alexandria, for example.
Hmm.
So there are a lot more condos in Arlington and Alexandria available for sale right now than, say, single family houses. And people who are living in condos are now buying single family houses out a little bit further because, as whomever it was that said it, they can get a much more house for the money. And without the high condo fees.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on lots of different real estate chat boards and chat rooms and things like that on Facebook and LinkedIn and a number of places. And one of the things that I'm hearing a lot, especially lately, is that the condo market has slowed down significantly. Now it's still a seller's market, but a condo being on the market a month feels like a lifetime when most houses or townhouses are on the market only a week, maybe. I think in Fairfax County, the average days on the market is less than 14 days.
Yeah, I've just heard so many stories about houses going on the market, and the next day it's already sold. In
In
this
fact,
area, Northern Virginia.
Gene, one of the things that we're starting to see, and again, it kind of was accelerated as a result of the pandemic, is buying houses sight unseen.
So we talked about this a year ago when you were on my local. Is that still the case?
Well, because now what we're starting to see, so during the shutdown, a lot of people didn't want to go see houses, and a lot of sellers who were living in their houses didn't want people coming in
Yeah.
because nobody wanted to be contaminated.
Mm-hmm.
So online showings became a very popular thing, and so guided tours online through like Matterport and other supported apps allowed people to see the house but not having to see it. And so that got people used to buying houses without going inside of them. Now what's happening, because the inventory levels are low, people are watching. So when a house goes active, you might be up against 10 or 15 other buyers for that same property. Even if you're only up against 3 or 4 buyers, the chances are 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 that you're going to get it. Somebody's not going to get it. And that is not fun when you're the person who really wants that house. So with the coming soon advertisements and a few things that private listings, or what is referred to in the industry as pocket listings, homes are now being sold because in the MLS, in our multiple listings service, which around in this region and actually the entire Mid-Atlantic, most of the Mid-Atlantic region, we use the MLS system is called Bright MLS. And it has some requirements. So if you put a listing as coming soon, you can only post exterior pictures. You can't post interior pictures. But if I see a coming soon house that's in an exact neighborhood that I really like, I might be inclined to write an offer and ask the seller to consider selling it to me sight unseen, because the MLS ruling and the association rules don't allow for showings during the coming soon status. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. And I don't think if we hadn't had the experience prior with the pandemic shutdown where people bought houses without seeing them by
Mhm.
going inside, that we would be experiencing that now. But we're seeing a fair amount of houses sold sight unseen,
Hmm.
and they don't see it until after it's under contract, which is why you would want an inspection.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to address some of the comments that are here before I. Oh, I just discovered something new with StreamYard. I just clicked on it. Do you see that like I see it?
I do see it. I love it. I love
I
it.
didn't even know it did that. Okay. Jennifer Rose, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but if there's anything you want to add, Darren, I know your crystal ball is in the shop, Darren,
Yeah.
but how long do you think this hot, crazy market is going to last? I remember the 2008 real estate bubble burst. We bought our house that year and got a great deal. And then she also mentioned in another comment, our first mortgage interest rate, in 03 was something like 6%. So yeah, huge difference.
6% was very commonplace back then. I think we're going to see a strong seller's market probably through next year. But we have seen a slight slowing, just so you know. But I would still not describe it as anything other than a seller's market. But it is starting to slow, and I think we're probably through the spring market next year, for sure. So at least probably another year of this. With companies like Amazon moving a bunch of employees in, Google just bought a big piece of land out in Reston. There was something else I saw. What big business just bought a big piece of, they bought a big property in Reston. They moved out of Philly. I can't remember. I know I posted something about it, but a lot of companies are moving into the area. Virginia has plenty of incentives for businesses to move here, and so buyer demand is pretty high. The other thing about our region that's always driving the market more towards a seller's market than a buyer's market is the fact that every 4 years we see a change of government on some level. Even if the administration stays, there's people moving in and out every election, and the military constantly moving people in and out. That really drives our market. We have a constant ebb and flow. Almost 75% of all home sales are people moving out of the area. And about 75% of all home sales are people moving into the area from outside of Virginia or the DMV. I don't remember where that statistic came from, but a previous broker shared that with me.
So do people, just a quick side note, I want to get back to the comments. Do people tend to not stay in their houses as much in this area because it's so transient, people moving in and out for government and other things?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. I think nationwide, the average homeowner remains in their property 10 to 15 years. And in the DMV, Northern Virginia area, it's less than 5 years.
Oh, wow. So I have heard that if you, in a normal market, if you don't stay in your house 5 years or more, you're losing money.
Not in Northern Virginia.
Okay. Well, I mean
yeah. And I can give you a quick example. My first house I ever bought in Virginia, it was a townhouse. It was near Fair Oaks. It was a long time ago, but I paid $200,000 for it, and in less than 4 years, sold it for $545,000. Areas outside of Northern Virginia and a few other metro areas like the DMV, other parts of the country just don't see that kind of increase in equity. I have a brother who owns property. My family all live in Minnesota. They're lucky if they get 1% to 3% increases every year. So then in a case like that, yes, you would have to own your house more than 5 years in order for you to have made a profit. But in Northern Virginia, especially, 3 years, you usually within 3 years you're probably showing a profit already, even with the cost of selling.
Okay. Jennifer Rose and Tim Fogarty both commented that the company you were talking about is Starkist.
Thank you, Starkist. That's right. Because it is kind of weird because you would think that a tuna company would be near the ocean, but I guess we're close to the ocean.
Closer
Chicken
than
of the sea.
Yeah, exactly. So Janice said that, cause we were talking about houses going in a couple of days instead of weeks. She said she saw it in her neighborhood of Herndon, Oak Hill, houses only on the market for days, not even weeks. And when you were talking
Hours.
about the more condos being or staying on the market longer than single family homes. She said, yes, less condo fees versus HOA fees, bigger square footage, room for home offices, and kids' study area. That's a
Yep.
good point.
All of those are the reasons why we're seeing a slowdown in the slight slowing in the condo market. It's slower than the single family house and the townhouse market. I would say that a condo typically is on the market about 3 to 4 weeks, where a typical house 4 to 5 days.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. And Rachel said that was the hardest part of moving last summer. I think I think that's when we were talking about just the inventory being low and such a buyer demand.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we were talking about the whole time. But yeah, I mean, since COVID. Oh, and actually, I'm glad she said that. That's a good point. So is what we're going through now all because of COVID and the pandemic?
It's not only because of the COVID and the pandemic, because actually the seller's market started before COVID hit the market. But COVID and the pandemic and the shutdown accelerated and made some real shifts in the market, specifically of people moving out away from the city versus moving into
Mm-hmm.
the city.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually not a bad time to buy some of those condos that are slowing down in the area as rental properties. Forgot that.
Yeah, that okay. So because of all those companies coming in, or because there's so many people that are transient coming into the area, you're more likely to be able to rent that condo out.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
okay.
And Virginia is a landlord-centric state, unlike DC, which is a tenant-centric area, where the laws and the regulations benefit more the tenant than the landlord. In fact, it's very difficult to sell an investment property in DC because it's almost impossible to get a tenant out of the property. I'm not licensed in DC any longer, but but in Virginia, you can evict somebody in like 30 to 45 days. It's a very quick process. It's very simple and easy. It's a very landlord centric state. And yeah, so it's a great area to buy a rental property and what we call buy and hold if you're an investor.
Mm-hmm.
Also, depending on in the part of Arlington that you might be in, and of course, you got to be careful because a lot of associations have started changing their rules, but short-term rental market is really strong. So if you can find a cute little condo or small property close to something unique, like I have friends who own it's an Airbnb, which is also referred to as a short-term rental. They own property right across the bridge from Georgetown, and their units are never empty, and they charge probably almost 10 times the going rate of a traditional rental. So where a unit like that might rent for $3,000 a month, if they had like a 12-month or 24-month lease, if they had where you have what's called short-term rentals, they can be getting $5,000 to $6,000 a week in some of those areas. You figure, I mean, if you're right across the street, right across the bridge from Georgetown, you can charge a pretty high daily rate.
Yeah.
So, little investment info. But a lot of the condo associations and a lot of the homeowners associations and a lot of the counties and cities and jurisdictions have started regulating some of that more and more because um, uh, liability taxes, all that sort of stuff that comes into play. And there's all sorts of reasons why government gets involved and associations get involved.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot to think about.
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to go back to the appraisal topic.
Sure.
One thing you had mentioned was that we talked about the house being listed for 500,000, the appraisal coming back for 475, and typically what's done is the buyer puts in 12.5 and the seller comes down in price by 12.5. In a normal market, if I'm a buyer, why would I want to pay more than what the house is worth?
Well, you probably wouldn't. It's and in most cases, it's not in your interest as a buyer to purchase a house that doesn't appraise.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, if we're in the marketplace that we're in right now, um, so let's say that the difference is $10,000. It appraised. We were short $10,000. You had to bring $10,000 to the table in order to move forward. You're probably going to recuperate that $10,000 in value in the next couple of months, right? And by next year at this time, it won't matter that it didn't appraise because you will have made a significant amount more than the $10,000 that you overpaid when you bought it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, if the market shifts and we have that, that like crazy drop in the market like we did the last time, which I do not expect.
Mm-hmm.
9 times in real estate is secular, and repeats itself, and it's usually slow changes. So traditionally, the changes over the last 100+ years, where we've tracked where the associations have tracked the real estate markets, the market shifts have shifted very slowly. You hardly notice them. 2008 was a rare exception where it just like went from like up until August of 2008, it was a seller's market. September 2008, it was a buyer's market. It just like went boom. That's a very rare occurrence. Typically, we'll just see a slight slowdown. So unless you bought a house where the market was just like to drop like that, you probably aren't going to notice much of a difference. I can tell you though, how honestly though, I try never to have my clients buy a house that doesn't appraise. So when I am working with the buyer, I take a real good look at, and real estate is part gut, part instinct, part expertise, part knowledge of what's going on, and kind of part psychic. And so when I construct the offer with my clients, all those things are in consideration. And I can honestly say that nearly every house that I sold in the past year has appraised or nearly appraised, meaning that the amount that it didn't appraise, the difference was insignificant, like just a few $1,000s. Not, I didn't have anything that was $10,000 under. And I think that's because a good offer, when it's constructed right and has all the right things, and you're in the right kind of market neighborhood, you kind of make some assessments. And I've been lucky. In fact, one of my most recent sales in Falls Church, it was listed for $750,000. My clients offered $825,000, and the appraised value ended up being $850,000. Because of the increase, because of the market, the seller's market, the demand was just driving the prices up really that fast. In that case, just so you know, Gene, my buyers had to put $25,000 in an earnest money deposit, and they didn't have any contingencies to fall back on. So if that deal wasn't going to go through, they would have lost their $25,000. That's a lot of money to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm working in those kind of situations, I craft my offers and I negotiate and work with my clients, and and do everything I can to try to find any loophole in any way to lessen the blow. Yeah, and in their case, they made money before they even moved in because of the market conditions.
Well, that worked out.
It did work out for them. Not everybody. I've been seeing
Yeah.
a lot of agents lamenting that their houses didn't appraise, their sales didn't appraise, and now their buyer has to come to the table, or their buyer's going to lose their deposit because they didn't have the money um,
hmm
to if it didn't appraise.
William Vaughn asked a question. How many of the home sales do you think are contributed by investors versus actual homeowners right now?
So the traditional sales that I'm seeing are almost all traditional buyers. The investor market is there's still a fair amount of investors out there, but the speculators are waiting for the market crash, and so a lot of them have pulled back a little bit in anticipation, because in an investor's mindset, buy low, sell high. And since this is a seller's market and prices are being driven up, a lot of investors are holding off in anticipation that in a couple of years the market will adjust down. So I would say maybe one in 10, maybe I'm seeing investors there now. Year and a half ago, different story. And again, it also kind of depends on where the houses are. In Woodbridge and Manassas, where there are still some houses in the under $350,000 range, sure, there's a lot of investors out there snatching those up. But in Arlington, Alexandria, Burke, Springfield, Fairfax City, those are markets that are not really being driven by the investors. Further out, Fredericksburg, Stafford, those are places where you're seeing a lot of investors. It's also a place where you're still seeing some short sales and foreclosures. Not really foreclosures, but short sales for sure.
We didn't even talk about that. We're already at an hour, but do you want to quickly talk about short sales and foreclosures?
Sure. One of the things that I think a myth is that if you find a short sale, you're going to be able to buy it below market value. And that just isn't the case any longer. When we had the big market crash in 2008, the banks weren't as savvy as they are now. So back then, a house that was being sold as a short sale, you could really get a good deal. But banks are now selling it at market value. Now, what is a short sale? It basically means that the seller owes more on the money, owes more back to the bank than they can sell the house for. So, simple example, if they owe on a let's say they bought a house for 500,000 and they still owe, let's say they owe 450,000, but the market value is only 400,000. They don't have enough money they don't have enough equity in the house to pay back the mortgage that they took out. And so you go through a process of negotiating, remediating with a asset manager, and you negotiate what's called a short payoff, meaning that the bank agrees to lower the money that the seller owes in order to complete the sale, and they usually pay the seller's closing costs. They're not very common right now in this part of Northern Virginia. There are some in Fredericksburg. In fact, I had a short sale last year. Full disclosure, it took 12 months to complete the transaction. We went under contract and we negotiated with the bank for 12 months before the bank agreed to all the terms. You can't move forward until the bank agrees. And that's partly because most bank loans are sold on the secondary market to investment funds or investors. That's where the whole hedge fund thing and et cetera is. And it's those investors that oftentimes say, well, we're not willing to sell off this house and take this loss. And so there's a lot of going back and forth. Fortunately, on my team, I have an amazing short sale mitigator. So if anybody on the call is in need of short sale negotiations, we're really capable of that, and we do a good job with it because Carolina, who works with me on my team, is bar none the best I've ever collaborated with. She's with a company called FISA Investments, and all she does all day long is negotiate with banks short payoffs.
Good to know.
Yeah. And there's a 0 foreclosure rate in Northern Virginia right now. But I think in a couple of years, we may see a little bit of a foreclosure boom, but not anything like the foreclosure boom of the mid 2000s.
Do you think that's because of the people that are buying houses now waiving contingencies?
I think that may be a contributing factor, yes. Because it's going to affect most of the people who buy at the end of the seller's market, not those of you who bought at the beginning or middle of the seller's market.
Because the prices have gone up and up and up by that point, and people who bought at the beginning of the seller's market have earned some equity. The value of the house has gone up.
Right. Because we're not going to see, like I said, it's very unlikely that we will see drops in the range of 30 to 50% loss in value. I just don't think we'll see that. I think we might see losses in like maybe excess of 20%.
That's still a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, sure. That's $20,000 for every $100,000. But I think between like if we see a market adjustment, it might go down 10 to 20%, 20% being on the very high end. I don't think we're going to see anything with anything more significant than that. That just doesn't see, that's not what's on the what's the expression? You know, when people are they're chirping in your ears.
The scuttlebutt? I don't know.
Yeah. The little birdies are chirping, but that's not what they're chirping about right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody that I've follow or talk to is suggesting anything with like a 30, 40, 50% losses in value. 5, 10, 15, maximum probably 20. And that would be a real extreme situation.
Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful.
There's just so much to talk about, but we've already gone over an hour. I guess if you guys who are watching have any more questions, pop them in. Otherwise, Darren, I think we're going to have to do this again because there's just so much more to talk about.
I could talk real estate all day long, every day.
I know.
I love the industry. It's strange because, you know, having been an artist in my previous career, or, you know, a theatrical artist, a dancer, you would think that real estate would be boring to me. But in fact, I get excited every day, and every day is an adventure.
Well, if you are looking to sell your house or buy a house, contact Darren Marquardt of the Marquardt team. And if you are looking, if what you are in need of is a short sale, Carolina on the Marquardt team can help you.
Absolutely.
So Darren, I really want to have you on again because I mean, there's really just so much more to talk about. But is there anything else you want to leave everybody with before we go?
Oh, just remember that every transaction that, you know, always have a real estate agent that represents your interest, especially in Virginia. If you're a seller, have a real estate agent sell your house. If you're a buyer, have a real estate agent represent you as a buyer. Avoid what's called dual agency, where the agent represents both, because I don't think that that's as effective. But really have representation, because, you know, the biggest challenges are in the middle and towards the end of the transaction, and that's where the knowledgeable real estate agent can really save your butt, especially if you're in risk of going in default and you lose your deposit. That's where I really excel. I oftentimes save my clients on that, and I oftentimes make my clients more money when I sell them than they would probably on their own. Don't for sale by owner. Hire a real estate agent. It's worth the time. It's worth the money and the headaches.
Yes, it is.
That's like a whole other conversation, though.
Like hiring any professional to deal.
Hire an attorney if you got yourself in trouble. Don't represent yourself. That'd be crazy.
Advise it.
Yeah, and certainly don't go. Will you negotiate this deal for me? Nobody would think about doing that, but people in real estate do it all the time.
That is a great example because how can you ethically, you have a fiduciary, I would assume fiduciary duty to your
Yep.
client. How do you adequately represent both the seller and the buyer when both of them are trying to make as much or spend as less? It just seems like a problem.
In those instances, 9 times out of 10, one of the parties, and usually both, are disgruntled by the end of the transaction because they feel that that their interest wasn't fully represented. That's why I say just get your own representation. It's the
Mhm,
best thing to do. There
mhm,
may be occasions. I did just refer somebody to the listing agent without having a buyer representation, but it was a situation where there were multiple offers and it seemed like the right thing to do, and she had me on the outsides going giving
mhm,
her advice on how to. But yeah, just hire an agent.
mhm. Yeah, I second that.
Yeah,
Javier said, "Thank you, Darren." So thanks, Javier, for watching.
yeah,
And
he's a great mortgage lender.
oh well, maybe Javier will have to come on the show sometime to talk about that.
I'll make sure you get an introduction. He's amazing.
Yeah, so Darren, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I seriously do want you to come back again.
Anytime.
So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week for the next local business spotlight. Darren, I'm going to end the video, but you and I will still be on here for a moment, so hang tight. Thanks guys for watching, and like and follow my page so you will get notifications of when I go live in the future. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jennifer. Jennifer said thanks for a great interview. Thank you, William. Everybody's chiming in at the end. Thanks, guys.